Hi and welcome back to Agile Toolkit, the Colibri school, and today we will start our first practical project. I believe we have enough knowledge to actually tackle this task, so I will start introducing you to the process of how you analyze the requirements, how you deal with the clients, because I want you to think that in every project there is always a person, some individual who acts as a client. So even if it is your partner, or maybe if you're building application for yourself, you should always think who is the client of your app, who's going to be using the application. We will go through the steps of planning, implementation, and testing your app together in this course. So diving a little bit into some of these steps, let's look inside the implementation specifically. What do we have to implement? And there's actually quite a lot of things, and for a start we will begin with the very basics. Okay, so we'll separate into business model and the user interface. That's the brain of your app, that's the face of your app. And as we're gonna go further into the lessons, we will go deeper over here, but for now we will start with models and fields for the business model. As for the user interface, we will only touch on the pages and the views. We will get back to this slide in the later lesson, so don't worry about it. The app we will be making is going to be called Party Time, and the first question I want to always ask you about any app is why there is a need for the app, who will make this app. So don't start planning application right away based on the requirements. Try to understand the background and environment and where is the need for the app is coming from. So in our case, our client is called Joe, and so it happens Joe has a party planned and he has invited some guests, but he isn't actually sure how many guests is going to turn up. So maybe it will be more than he expects. Now, if more guests turns up, maybe Joe needs to have more food available for the guests. Also, the other thing is that Joe usually implies a bring your own drink policy. So the guests have to supply the drink. And again, he needs to understand if the guests are bringing too little drink or too much drink. Well, there's no such thing as too much drink. Anyway, so the goals of our application is to know who's going to be coming and how many of them. We'll need to make sure no kids will be coming, because that would be adult party. And finally, we need to inform guests that there is a bring your own drink policy, and we will probably going to ask them if they are bringing and how much drink they're bringing. So the way our app would help us solve these goals is by asking a guest to fill out the form before they arrive for the party, and then storing this information in a database, additionally asking them to enter the age and ask how much drink they will be bringing. And once we know the approach, we can talk about solutions. So how exactly we build a form that the guests can fill out. So we need a page and we need a form. How do we store it in a database? So we will need a guest model and obviously some database as well. What about age? We will need to employ some form validation. And finally, we also need to store drink amount in a corresponding column. To reiterate what we've learned in the past few lessons, I'm going to go through all the steps from the very beginning, and we will build the application essentially from scratch. And I will also walk you through some of the decisions why we're doing certain things and not the other ones. So since your application is very heavy on the user interface, we will be using Agile Toolkit once again. And this time we're going to download the bundle once more, unpack it, and place it inside our sites folder. And remember that we have our web server installed locally, so I should be able to see this. Okay, now be sure you're using a recent version of Agile Toolkit. So I'm recording this for version 1.4 and 2. You might use a later version, but if it's an older one, then you'll have to re-download it. Okay, next, be sure that you have your GitHub account ready and set up, and also be sure you have your Heroku account as well, so they get signed up into this if you haven't yet. All right, now that this application is working here, open your GitHub desktop app and go add local repository, and then choose the folder for the party app application. All we have to do is call initial commit over here, and now we can publish this to GitHub. All right, let's go verify in our GitHub that the repository was successfully created and uploaded here. And here it is. And as a next step, we need to deploy it to Heroku. So we have our first application ready for anyone to see. And I wanted to go in Heroku and create click new app. There are various ways to deploy to Heroku, and the simplest one is to connect to the GitHub. So that's what we will use. And then finally, click here to connect your application. Now, every time there's a commit, it will be automatically built, but initially we should click the deploy branch so that at least something will be built and deployed automatically. Again, the downloadable from Agile Toolkit comes in such a way so you could do this without any additional changes. But if you're not using the zip, you'll have to introduce more steps. And then finally, our application is live, so we can click this button, and you see we have the unique URL. The SSL is working on our domain. Oops, and that's your app. So. Okay, next let's open our Atom. I'll just make sure that the correct folder is open. And I'm going to start with a small modification and put party app over here. So right now I'm going to show you the full life cycle of the application. So we perform a change. Then I'm going to my browser over here. Now this one. Over here, so localhost, and I'm going to refresh that, see change to the party app. So if I'm happy with this change, I'm going to desktop, explain what the change was for. So it's very useful to leave a useful note in here. Commit it to the master and push to origin. Now the application, okay, we're not going to need that. Application should be updated in here. So you see there are 2 commits, and that's the last commit coming through. You should also be able to see that the application has been deployed. Once it's done deploying, I can refresh over here, and I should be able to see change of the name from application from Agile Toolkit to party app. Right, so we're successful. We'll keep doing that throughout the lesson, and that's our workflow. The other thing we'll need is a database. So I have prepared a local database already. We used it before. Let's create a party app over here. I'm going to call table guest. So let's think about what type of columns we can need for this. So obviously the name is important, as well as the surname. Probably we would like to have some contact information. So let's add phone and email. So the length I'm using 255 out of habit, but to be honest, it can be 300 or anything else. Age. So let's keep that as an integer. I'm going to call this field units of drink. So that's, let's say, I don't know, gallons or liters or whatever. anyway, units. So that will be used to calculate how much units we have in total from all the guests. All right, that should be enough for now. Yeah, next thing we'll need to do is to plan out the file layout. So previously, in our previous example, we pretty much had everything in a single file. Now we will have multiple pages, the one for sign up, the one for admin. So we have to think about organization of our files. Now you remember that there's a really nice method called require or include, and I will create a file called init.php. All the stuff that repeats from page to page, I'm going to move and place inside the init.php file. The next thing I'm going to add there would be my own application. So previously we used the class app as it is declared in ATK UI and then initialize stuff manually. But since I'm building my own application, it makes sense to have my own application class. Okay, and now in this application I can plan how it will be initialized. So it's also a very good habit if you leave some comments in your code from the very beginning, because you will be able to come back to your application and you will know what it does. Because trust me, if that's your first time writing an application code, you will keep forgetting things and what things do. I also need to create a call to the parent constructor. Another thing you have to keep in mind, so when you're overriding a method inside your object, be sure to call the parent's version of that method. Also, there will be a lot of changes. You will be changing it back and forth, so make sure that the code looks nice and clean. So and quite often editor, in this case Atom, will help you with the correct indentation, so just make sure not to mess it up. Now that our class is ready, I'm going to replace the content of admin PHP and index PHP with this new class. For testing, it's quite useful to use a exit keyword, which will terminate the app execution at this point. So what happens is that your application, once it reaches the end of the file, or once the execution is terminated, it will output all the contents of your application in the browser. So by placing exit strategically in the middle of your app, you can cut off all the views or all the elements which are added before and display them, and anything below that will not actually be executed. Alright, so I have made mistake in here, and instead of constructor, the method here should be called construct. The admin interface should be using a different layout, so I'll have to go to the admin page and specify argument as true. The thing that happens here is when I'm calling new app, it creates a new app object, and the argument in here is passed into the constructor, which becomes this variable isAdmin, and then the condition over here initializes the layout to either admin or center, depending on whichever I have chosen. In Agile UI, it uses a term called seeds, but essentially when you add an item into a menu like this, it looks like you can pass a string like this, but you can actually wrap that into square brackets and there would be no effect. But once it's in square brackets, you can add additional keys into that, such as icon. And I'm going to show you where you can look for the icons that you can use. Agile UI is based on Semantic UI, which is a CSS library, and it has a quite extensive icon set. So let's see if there's anything resembling a cake or a party that we can use. There's a birthday cake in there, so let's use that. Okay, our next task would be to create a model and to actually connect to the database so that The data would be stored inside our MySQL table. In a later application, we will use a pattern where each class has its own file, but for now this is a quite simple app, so I will be using just one file, init.php, to define all the classes. Now, a good place to establish database connection would be as we initialize the app, because every time we use application, we also probably will be storing something in a database. So in here, I'll be using a method called thisDBConnect. Alright, so our interface for the admin seems to be complete. We can now add records into the database by using this form over here, and so we will actually see who will be coming. I can also go to the database console and verify that the record was actually stored in here properly. The next step would be to create a sign-up page where users would be able to access and fill out the information for themselves. I think that for this user interface, it would be better if our form would stay on the left, and on the right I will be able to display this welcome and the warning, and maybe I'll need to add some additional information for everyone to see before they come. Okay, this looks quite good. I will go back to the model definition, and some fields have to be required, such as for the age. We want them to definitely fill out the age. So as a second argument to add field, we can specify that this field is required. And as soon as you do that, you'll see that there is an asterisk in here. And also when I'm saving this form, it will be automatically validated that, and the user will be told that this field must not be empty. And in here I have, just for diversity, I have used the method called add fields. And what this does, it allows me to specify fields all together like that. It's a bit less writing. Now, question is, what if I want to specify some properties such as required for one of these fields? It is still possible. So let's say name is required. Surname probably is not required. So the phone probably is required. Yeah, let's add one more field. And for this one, we want to have a selection between two possible choices. So I will use enum. Okay, and the values should be stored like that. Okay, so now I can select gender from the list, either male or female. Okay, so our form looks complete. Let's try signing it. Okay, and yeah, so I intentionally left this so you can see this error, and let's learn to read this error. So first of all, it's coming from DSQL. Yeah, so that's the low layer of interactive of the framework which interacts with the database, and it said that it got exception when it was trying to execute the query. If you remember, then queries are used to interact with the table, with the database, and in this case the error was that the column gender wasn't found. So if we go here, look at the structure, there's no gender column. Let's add it. Remember, I can go to admin anytime and I can see the list of my guests, but it would be nice if we had another page on the admin which would tell us some information about all the people that are coming. So let's call it a dashboard. And in here, so we'll remove this for now. And also I would like the admin is able to navigate between two pages. So inside my init file, remember this place over here is where I'm populating the menu with the birthday cake. The second argument to add item can specify the name of the page. So this is called dashboard. And I think I need to use square brackets. All right. So have admin and dashboard. You see I can navigate between those two pages. And all I have to do on the dashboard is now create a widget here. So I want to see how much guests will be actually coming. But as of right now, the Agile UI, Agile Toolkit doesn't have a view which will tell us which we can use on the dashboard. So I will show you how you can use a little bit of HTML to design your own view. I want to place the HTML for this dashboard in a file. And I also would like to add this dashboard inside the application over here. So we'll see the error right now because the namespaces. Yeah. So when I'm adding object like this and specifying the parameter as a string, then it assumes that this will be coming from Agile UI. So this is quite good for new users. And if you want to use your own view, you will say new dashboard. So this way we're creating an object of a class dashboard, passing it to add, and it is now possible to add it. This is the folder where it tries to load the template file from, and you see it prefixed with the template, semantic UI, and the dashboard, which is not something we want. In here, I'm saying that I want to use the folder of a current file and then /dashboard. It means the dashboard HTML will be located in the same folder where the file init is. It's worth looking at some of the examples. Going to UI-agiletooolkit.org, that's a demo app. There's a section for views in here. And these are all the views, all different views. So you can click view source, and let's look at some of the views in here. So this one is quite interesting because it has a custom HTML defined. So, well, without knowing anything about HTML, I'm going to take that. But in my case, I'm not specifying HTML directly. Instead, I want to load it from the file. Okay, and that's our view. So let's actually look inside the file here, and you see this is a tag in Agile UI, and it can be inserted using a simple operation. So I'm going to go into my dashboard definition here and define a method called setModel. The reason I'm using this, so I technically could probably use any method, but the reason I'm using this method is because I want my my view to be consistent with all the other views, such as table, form, which have a method called setModel, which associates this particular piece of UI with a piece of business logic. All right, and the next thing I'll need to do is in my dashboard here, I'll have to do setModel, pretty much same as in here. Okay, so let's actually calculate how many guests would be coming. And to do that, I'll need to go over here and get number of records. Yeah, we need to return the value of this model, which is actually returned by this. Actually, we could do like that, m equals parent set model m. and we use this model here. Let's perform the counting. Let's see if this works. Yep, we have 2 guests coming. Right, next let's go to the dashboard HTML. So since we're designing this one, let's try to duplicate that. And this one would be showing number of drinks the users are bringing. Let's calculate how many drinks are there. This is slightly different because instead of calculating number of rows, we need to calculate a sum of this column, units of drink. This time we're using a different action, which is actually a generalized function, and I could use a sum in here. I can use average, maximum, minimums, and so on. Looking at our dashboard, okay, we have number of guests coming and drinks delivered. So I'd say it is probably a good time to deploy our application in the cloud. So initially I will follow the same steps. Add the new files. You see that it automatically detected my commit when I pushed it to GitHub, and it's currently deploying. But this time I am unable to connect to the database. And if you think about that, we have installed application locally and our SQL server was also local. And now that we deploy it to the cloud, it is no longer to connect to my local SQL server. So we need a SQL server in the cloud. And the way to enable that is by using an add-on. The add-on is actually supplied by a different company, in this case, not Heroku. And there is a integration which happens behind the scenes. You can explore it. If once you add it, you can click on the link in here for the database, but it's not really important right now. What is important is that automatically HerokuDB created this environment variable for us, which contains a connection string. And now I'm taking the information from the connection string, such as host, username, and password, and I can actually use that to directly connect to a ClearDB database provisioned by Heroku partner. Okay, so now I have 2 connections to 2 databases, as you can see. I can either execute the create for an individual table like that, but to be honest, the more useful way is if I perform an export into a SQL format from my local database, and then I will re-import entire database into ClearDB using my SQL application like that. Okay, now we have provisioned database in the cloud and we have a connection string, but our application is still not working. And the reason for that is because we still haven't specified how to connect to that database. We don't have to copy the connect string. Would be a pretty bad way to do it. Instead, we will check the environment and use that connection string if the environment is supplied. All right, now I'm just have to commit my changes and push it to the cloud. The Heroku will notice my changes and will eventually deploy live. So my current application supports both the local development, where the environment variable is not present, and also it works equally well in the cloud. Okay, so that's complete. And let's just do a quick test to see if the functionality is still working in the cloud for my guests. So that's going to be all for today. Thanks again for following my course, and next time we'll have some other practical exercise.